Right, this is a T-72. Probably at the beginning of the war, the most numerous tank that the Russians had there. Also, the Ukrainians had T-72s as well. As the name sort of says, came into service in the sort of 70s, actually designed in the 60s. A really good tank. I mean, seen throughout the world. I was talking to a Syrian tank commander in Syria only a few weeks ago, and he was in a T-72 in the Golan Heights. He got shot out from under him 4 times, and he survived. And that really brings in a really interesting perspective. This is a great. I mean, this looks. If a child draws a tank, they sort of draw something like this. And in tank design, you have firepower, protection, and mobility are the sort of the triumvirate. And this is a great demonstration of firepower. Big 125 millimeter cannon here, accurate up to about 2 kilometers, and a couple of heavy machine guns as well. So that's your firepower. You can also fire anti-tank guided missiles through it, which is really interesting. And mobility, quite fast for a tank, about 40 miles an hour. That is pretty quick. But when it comes to armor, not very much of it, which is why people will see so many Russian tanks destroyed. And often with the turrets blown off, there's a real weakness. It's what we call the turret ring. And the Ukrainians work that out. If they can fire even a 25 millimeter weapon into here, it can destroy it. So very numerous, very capable, very mobile, but the actual protection is pretty poor. And that's why, and vastly overmatched by the British Challenger 2. We're going to talk about the German Leopard and the American Abrams.
And Russia does have more modern tanks in this. I'm thinking of things like the T-90, among others. I mean, what does it say of Russia's strategy and capabilities at this point in the conflict that this is still the workhorse?
Well, the T-80 doesn't look much different to this, and the T-90 a little bit different. What we don't have on here is what we call reactive armor, which those sort of tanks would have. The T-90s, the T-80s, the elite units, they have been destroyed long time ago. The T-70 is the most numerous, but also we're seeing a lot of even older T-64B, which sort of looks similar to this, and even the T-55. So I think it's Russia using sort of what it's got. Lots of stories, taking these out of museums, out of tank sheds, and getting them revamped. They are very basic, very simple. Training is a key thing here. I could probably train you in 2 or 3 days, and you could fire the gun and you could drive the tank. But if anything went wrong, you'd be in trouble. You need to repair it. So that's why the Russian, dead simple. I mean, these things have been taken out. They're only allowing tank crews a week or two's training and then put it back in them. We go and look at the Challenger 2, much more sophisticated, much more challenging. So they just couldn't get involved in that. So I think it's a reflection where the war is, and a reflection of what kit they've got left and what they can still, recover, repair, and get back on the battlefield.
And I suppose it reflects the impact that a lot of sanctions are having, equipment and parts embargoes. I mean, the Russians, we're hearing now, a lot of their parts and replacement parts are coming from the North Koreans. I mean, what kind of impact can that have?
Well, certainly sanctions. I wouldn't have thought there's too many sort of spare parts that sanctions are affecting something like a T-72. But certainly, making them and getting spares is a challenge. Now, the North Koreans have this stuff as well, and they seem happy to give it to the Russians, as they have thousands of soldiers. I mean, my concern is what North Korea are getting in return, that which is probably nuclear technology, and that is obviously a completely different topic. But it's where the state of the war is and the state of the Russian military.
So this is a Russian armored vehicle, MTLB-U is the name of it. What can you tell us about how the Russians use this sort of thing in mechanized warfare?
Well, this is usually a sort of command vehicle, or can be. We have lots of variants. It could be used for electronic warfare, carrying mortars, carrying infantry. But as you can see, it's a big vehicle. And again, it's sort of, when looked firepower, protection, and mobility, mobility, it's pretty good. Protection, you know, and this is a real vehicle. It's got about, I don't know, half an inch of armor. This might keep out a rifle shot, but not much more. Fairly mobile, and firepower it'll have a heavy machine gun on the front. But on the battlefield in Ukraine, these are so vulnerable. I mean, this is easily taken out by a FPV drone, first person view drone. So we're not seeing a lot of them. We're seeing a lot of destroyed ones on the battlefield. But you can imagine if I told you, we're going to get in the back of this and go across, a trench system in Ukraine, you would hopefully tell me to get lost, because you wouldn't last very long. But yeah, this is a sort of ubiquitous, common Russian troop carrying vehicle, but it also does other bits and pieces too.
They're not ideal for the modern battlefield against things like drones and top-down attack weapons, perhaps. And in reflection of that, Russian tactics have partially abandoned using vehicles like this to get right up to trench systems in favor of, these mass attacks we were talking about earlier on foot. I mean, how does that reflect Russian tactics in this conflict?
Well, I think it reflects the reality. The Russians know if they put a lot of troops in here, they're unlikely to get to their objective. So it's a question of working out how they can get there. And certainly by the use of chemical weapons, use of other elements, they're more likely to get people to the front line than they are using these vehicles. And although the Russians aren't worried about morale and things like that, it's pretty clear that their soldiers are only fighting now for money, or if they've been let out of jail. But the Russians, they are not stupid. And they realize that using vehicles like these are just not going to get them where they are. And when they've got lots of manpower, they can just keep throwing it into the meat grinder, and that's what they're doing.
Well, Hamish, I think this is probably a far more familiar sight to you in terms of the vehicles they've got here today. Can you tell us what we're looking at here?
Well, absolutely. We're looking at Challenger 2. I spent thousands of hours commanding one of these tanks, so very familiar to me. A derivative from the Challenger 1, which doesn't look too different. I think the first thing people will notice how much bigger it is than the T-72 we've just looked at there. And when we look at the firepower, protection and mobility, firepower, it's got a 120 millimeter rifle gun. Ukrainian tankies really like this because you can knock out a T-72 at about 3 kilometers, whereas a T-72 can only hit one of these at 2 kilometers. And that brings it on to the protection. You'll see the sloped armor here. It's what's called Dorchester armor. It's secret. It's composite, but it can take fire from a T-72, T-80, T-90. And we've seen that, although 2 Challengers, from what we know, have been taken out in Ukraine, lots of them have been hit by Russian tanks and still cracked on. Mobility-wise, I mean, it's a big, heavy beast, 70 tons, as opposed to about 55 tons. It's got a Rolls-Royce V12 engine. It sounds very good, but it's only 1,200 horsepower, and it's, to push this sort of thing around is, it does it, but it could do with a bit more. And when we go into Challenger 3, which is replacing this, it has a more powerful engine, so it will get there. Some of the sighting systems here are really sophisticated, thermal sights, and the commander has various other sights too. And we have a couple of machine guns, a coaxially mounted machine gun, 7.62, and also a machine gun on the top. So a really, really capable vehicle, and really almost, when people ask me, I'm writing a book on tanks at the moment, what's the best tank? Well, the best tank I've ever been on is a Challenger 2. And I'm hoping I'll be able to say the Challenger 3 actually brings in everything else and is the best tank in the world.
And I've noticed one addition that is a Ukrainian invention or an invention out of the war, this sort of cage structure that's on top of the vehicle. What can you tell us about this and what its linked to this war in particular?
Absolutely. As we've discussed many times, drones have come of age. And these first-person view drones, $500 drones dropping hand grenades through open hatches, have destroyed so many tanks. Not so much Challengers, because the Russian tanks blow up because they have their tank ammunition just on the ground or in the turret. And once it's ignited, it blows up. Actually, in the Challenger, you've got armored charge bins that would prevent that, but still a real issue. I mean, in the tank museum, the very early tanks in the First World War actually had cages on as well. Nothing really changes. The Battle of Cambrai, tank soldiers were worried about German soldiers throwing sticky bombs, hand grenades onto the top. So they put chicken wire cages. These guys now have realized that drones, the way to defeat drones is to have a cage like this. So if it drops a hand grenade, it blows up on top of the cage rather than on top of the tank. So I am sure that the current British tank soldiers and developers are looking at what the Ukrainians have done and will do something similar.
And now, the Challenger hasn't been supplied in massive numbers in Ukraine, but other European tanks have played a pretty important role in this conflict, haven't they?
Absolutely. Only 14 of these went to the front line. The mentioned 2 have been destroyed, but quite a lot more Leopard 2 tanks, which are not dissimilar to this, and 30 or 40 perhaps more, and also the American Abrams tank, which again similar sort of vintage to this. So there are about 100, 150 plus Western tanks, which, had they had 1,000, would have made a huge difference. But these are a bit like, the Tiger tank in the Second World War. These vastly overmatch what they're up against.
And that's a sign, isn't it, those European tanks there, that Europe can contribute to this conflict, to Ukraine's defense, at least in terms of weaponry?
Well, certainly Western weaponry, when you consider it against Russian weaponry, is far superior generally. It also is far more expensive, which is an issue here. You could probably get 3 T-72s for 1 Challenger 2. But if we give it in enough numbers, and hindsight's a great thing. If we're given a lot more at these at the beginning, we might not be in the position we are. But the West, or certainly European NATO countries, have now really got this defense bit between their teeth and are building up their forces. Now, whether the UK is going to get more tanks, they're certainly getting 150 of the Challenger 3s new. Whether that will be enough, who knows? Obviously, money is at a premium, but Western equipment is performing generally much better than Russian equipment, and that must be, a real consolation and a good thought for those of us in Europe and the West to consider.
Well, Hamish, Bretton-Gordon, thank you very much for joining us today on Frontline. I wonder if I can ask where we can find that book you were talking about.
Yes, my next book will be about a year's time. All good bookshops, as they say, but I'm writing it in conjunction with the Tank Museum. So I think it'll be on the shelves here for people in about a year's time.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Louis Sykes. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news and analysis, or read it on thetimes.com. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.